Magandang araw, Pilipinas. Aloha, Hawaii, and good day to the rest of the world. This study is entitled Implicit and Explicit Modeling of Communicative Strategies and Oral Proficiency of Selected Grade 11 Students. To introduce the topic, it is in the viewpoint of an English teacher like me that I noticed that students nowadays focus on written and oral grammar in English, which is in fact a good thing in a Philippine academic setting. However, sometimes these students forget that grammar is not really the most important thing in communicating. Communicative competence is. Communicative competence, according to Cannell and Swain, is the holistic competence or ability of a person in communication. Its four components are namely linguistic competence, or a person's ability to use language with proper structure and grammar. Second, social linguistic competence. It is, on the other hand, a person's ability to find and use the appropriate words and conversations in every real life situations. The third competence under communicative competence is discourse competence, or the ability to build a conversation with proper starters and proper replies. To highlight, the fourth competence under communicative competence is the most important, and this is strategic competence. It is now the ability to use communicative strategies so a speaker can be understood by the hearer or the receiver in times when communicating seems to be difficult because of unforeseen differences, like maybe differences in native languages or differences in the way you think or concept. So, the big question is, how will you know that a person is strategically competent in communicating? A person is strategically competent in communicating if he or she knows how to use communicative strategies in different situations. These are systematic techniques employed by a speaker to express his own idea even when faced with difficulties. On the other hand, communicative strategies are also mutual attempts of two interlocutors to agree on a meaning in situations where requisite meaning strategies do not seem to be shared or to fit. Therefore, to coin it all simply, communicative strategies are personal techniques of speakers or interlocutors to come up or cope up and find ways in order to express what they want to express in moments when they are having a hard time understanding or comprehending each other due to inevitable reasons. Well, it is the major reason why the researcher tackled the specific study. It is because students, specifically senior high school students, nowadays only focus on written and oral grammar, when in fact they shall focus on communicative competence more so in their communicative strategies. So, the researcher asked the following questions in which to determine whether the implicit and explicit modeling of communicative strategies employed by the teacher made an impact to the oral proficiency of the students. Specifically, it sought to answer first, what are the oral proficiency scores of the students in the control and experimental groups before and after the intervention classes? Second, is there a significant difference between the mean gain scores of the control and experimental groups? Third, what are the communicative indicators and word signals that determine the student's use of communicative strategies before and after the modeling process when grouped according to paraphrasing, transferring, and avoidance? So, definitely, this study will not be successful without having its theoretical lens or framework. I used the social interaction theory on communicative strategy by Tarone and social interaction theory of language by Lev Vygotsky. It is important to note that in social interaction theory, it stresses that communicative strategy is more fitting for a social activity than a psychological one, unlike what Ferch and Casper believed in their study in 1983. Perron stressed that communicative strategies, following her social interaction theory, are mutual attempts of two interlocutors to agree on a meaning in situations where requisite meaning do not seem to be shared. Therefore, communicative strategies include linguistic and social linguistic factors, not just psychological factors. Taron's communicative strategies have the components paraphrasing, transferring, and avoidance. Paraphrasing is a strategy in which a speaker tries to formulate other terms and structures of sentences in order to let the hearer or receiver understand his or her real meaning. It has subtopics such as approximation, word coinage, circumlocution, and so much more. Transferring, on the other hand, is a strategy in which a speaker tries to shift from one language to another, and even from one topic to another in order to be understood. Its subtopics are literal transaction, language switch, appeal for assistance, and using minds. Avoidance, on the other hand, is a strategy in which a speaker tries to pass concepts or even abandon the conversation about the initial topic just because the one he or she is speaking about cannot get the point or terms being talked about. It only has two subtopics, which are topic avoidance and message abandonment. On the other hand, for the second variable of the study, which is oral language proficiency, specifically in the target language of English, it is anchored from Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theory of language, which stresses that a child best learns language and its usage if there is a learned or expert adult who guides and supervises his or her language growth. The said phenomenon or principle is also coined as the zone of proximal development or scaffolding, which means that the child will reach his advanced point in language if an adult who is an expert of the field helps him and guides him to reach his limit. Taron's social theory on communicative strategies and Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theory of language play a big role in the success of the study. For the communicative strategies serve as the intervention of the teacher who tests the effectiveness of such in classroom instruction in order to achieve the goal of enhancing the student's oral proficiency. And with the help of Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theory of language, it can be strengthened that indeed the teacher's intervention in teaching language with effective communicative strategies have a crucial factor on the language proficiency of the students. For the methods used and the data collection process, the researcher used the mixed method, in which it means that qualitative and quantitative data were used. The quantitative data was attained through quasi experimental method. Next, for the instruments used in the study, the researcher used the teacher's lesson plan, teacher's lesson guides, and the oral proficiency test rubrics, which is a standardized test. The researcher, on the other hand, employed the purposive sampling, in which the criteria shall be a student shall be a top student of the class, and he or she shall be a member of the academic strands STEM, Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics, or ABM, Accountancy, Business, and Mathematics, and HUMS, or Humanities and Social Sciences strand, which are academic strands in the senior high school program. There were 36 students and one teacher in the senior high school program who were tapped to participate in the study. Now, going to the data presentation and findings of the study, let's look at the table in front of us. Shown in Table 1 is the oral proficiency scores of selected grade 11 students before and after communicative strategies were introduced. It is observed that there is an increasing trend of oral proficiency scores of the pretest and post-test for the control group, which received the implicit approach in modeling Taron's communicative strategies. Same trend is observed for the pretest and post-test scores of the experimental group that received the explicit approach in modeling Taron's communicative strategies. So, based on the mean score of both groups, there is an increasing trend in the scores of the students before and after the intervention took place in the study. For the control group, there is an increase of less than 1 point, and for the experimental group, there is a noticed increase of 2 points in the scores, which says that indeed there is a movement in the whole experimentation process. From the results of the table, it implies that if the students are maybe given more time to be in classes, they will still learn more and they will try or they will still continue to yield increasing scores in their assessments. And more importantly, they will still continue to develop and improve communicatively and holistically. The said results were supported by Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theory of language, wherein, in the theory, it is also known as the zone of proximal development. It says that students learn language up to their limits if they are guided by an expert adult in the field. And it gives the implication that the improvement in the scores of the participants from the pretest and the post-test were due to the immersion and intervention classes done by the teacher who stood as the expert adult at the time. For the second result, let us look at the table. Depicted on the second table is the test for significant difference between the mean gain scores of the control and experimental groups. Using the t-test for independent samples, the mean gain scores between the control group and experimental group is not statistically significant. Therefore, accepting the null hypothesis that indeed there is no significant difference in the mean gain scores of the groups. From the results of the second problem, it gives the implication that the implicit and explicit modeling of communicative strategies did make an impact on the oral proficiency of the participants equally without making a significant difference as to which kind of modeling worked better. Just like the first set of results, it can be supported by Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theory of language learning or the zone of proximal development. It shows that despite the evident improvement of the scores of both groups, it still failed to yield a significant difference because of the realization that the duration of the intervention and immersion classes were just too short to yield a favorable difference. However, with the help of Freud's theory of psychoanalysis enhanced by John Piaget, the knowledge of the students shown in the impromptu speech from the pretest and post-test is still expected. For the minds of the students are not clean slates, and their knowledge on the target language of English is brought out by their pre-conscious and subconscious minds that hide memories, learning, information, and experiences. For the third one, it is the qualitative data taken from the results of the third problem, which generated themes under Charon's communicative strategy. In the participants' responses under the communicative strategy of paraphrasing, it was observed that these participants are mostly paraphrasing their statements in the responses when they cannot find the perfect words to describe or state the exact words that fit their meaning. So they just came up with words near to what they meant, thus generating with the theme, the participants could not find the exact words that describe or stated what they mean. Another set of participants were not able to get their first few words straight to the point, so they tried to paraphrase their speech to get closer to the meaning they wanted to convey. Thus, generating the theme, the participants were rewording due to the realization that the first terms used were erroneous. On the other hand, some underwent a different situation when they paraphrased because they realized midpoint that they were about to say a wrong term. Awareness came to some of the participants, that's why they were able to finish the right word, thus generating the theme. The participants were pausing in midpoint due to the awareness that they were about to say wrong terms. For transferring, for the participants' responses under the communicative strategy of transferring, it was evident that most of the participants were sometimes slipping into the native language, sometimes asked for assistance from the audience, and or using mime to express something. Some participants move both hands in a circular motion when they wanted to elicit assistance from the audience with hopes that the audience can throw the right term towards them, thus generating the theme. The participants were often asking for the audience's assistance to certain words in the target language. It is also different in the case of some participants when they failed to translate what they wanted to convey in the target language. Instead, they blurted out the native term for their words. Thus, generating the theme, the participants were accidentally using the native word or language instead of the target language. Another example would be from another set of participants when they pointed their hands to themselves to express to everyone that they are talking about themselves, or the example is pertaining to them. Thus, generating the theme, the participants were using mimes to express something. In the participants' responses under the communicative strategy of avoidance, many participants use words and pauses to express that they want to end their sentence, statement, or their answers, just like when some participants express abandonment of their answer. Thus, generating the theme, the participants were expressing that they want to end the answer. For some participants, it was somewhat clear that they want to continue their statement. However, because of some unforeseen circumstances, they changed their pace and just abandoned their first thought, thus generating the theme. The participants were stopping to change their answer because the writer made sense midpoint. For some examples, the participants felt coerced by themselves deep inside. The stop to prevent more embarrassment, thus generating the theme. The participants are stopping in midpoint because of embarrassment. So, provided the raw data and analysis expounded, the communicative indicators and word signals which the participants used during the pre-test and post-test given to them by the teacher were segregated into themes, thus contributing to their oral proficiency. For examples of Turno's communicative strategies exemplified by the students before and after the intervention classes, it can be explained by Sigmund Freud's theory on psychoanalysis, enhanced by John Piaget's work on the cognitive unconscious. Because just like my explanation, my explanation or the researcher's explanation for the results of the second table, there are layers of the mind which keep records of a person's lifelong learning, which through circumstances, intention, and deliberation can be retrieved in memory. Those information about communicative strategies were stored in the mind of the students even before their teacher modeled it onto them. And those communicative strategies were retrieved when they were tasked to answer the pre-test and post-test in the form of impromptu speech test. Another theory that supports the results is Lev Vygotsky's social interaction theory on language, which is also known as the zone of proximal development. The theory stressed that the child can learn language well if there is a learned or expert adult whom he can adapt the communicative skills from. The said theory was the underlying reason why the students in the experiment performed a great number of samples that showed communicative strategies to be able to communicate in the target language. The students performed well because all throughout their academic life and training, they were guided and supervised by learned professionals, which include, but not limited to, their English teachers. So, this study concludes that if the students are given more time to stay in class or more time to be guided by the teacher, they will be able to learn more, especially in terms of personality and communication. On the other hand, educators shall remember that the students in the senior high school level are not clean slates because they learned and adapted things from different people while they were growing up, especially in terms of communicating. Educators who exemplify better teaching strategies in class can definitely help students learn better than they used to. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is the study entitled Implicit and Explicit Modeling of Communicative Strategies and Oral Proficiency of Selected Grade 11 Students, with a researcher, yours truly, Alan Sayastan, a licensed professional teacher, and the teacher of San Pedro College in Davao City, Philippines. Learning beyond learning.